In episode 7 of Taboo, we see major changes in James's visions. Starting with how his visions begin. And we see that he uses some type of gold, I don't know what color it is, I'm colorblind, orangish powder to perhaps enhance his visions. And then we see this color throughout his visions. It's hard to say whether the color in the visions is because he used the powder to enhance them, or if they're supposed to represent a change for James. The first thing we see in his first set of visions is Salish standing in the water. Salish looks very different than she has in the past. She's peaceful and still, and she looks beautiful. It almost appears as if she's dressed not only in her traditional tribal clothes, but as tribal royalty. Then we see Salish standing right in front of James, and she's looking down on him, as if she's expecting him to do something. And then we go to Horus, who's standing in the woods and on land. It's interesting that Horus is on the land because we see Salish and James in the water, but we never see Horus in the water. But Horus is looking at James in a scornful way. Again, like he's expecting James to be doing something that he's not. Now, we've seen Horus morph into Salish in James's past visions, but in this one, we see James morph into Horus. And to wrap things up, we see Horus, Salish, and then James. Both Horus and Salish screaming, and James standing very unemotionally. So there's no doubt that this first set of visions definitely revolved around both Horus and Salish and where James is at as far as how he feels about both of his parents. It almost leaves us with the impression that James feels that both of his parents are waiting for him to do something. There's a lot of new stuff in this set of visions. We also see the gold orangish color carried through these visions. Now, these set of visions begin with the flashback to the influence sinking. And we see the slaves at the bottom of the boat and water dripping on them. There have been 3 different episodes that James has pointed out leaky roofs and the need to fix them. And seeing this flashback with the water dripping on the slaves, it leads us to believe that James isn't really anal about fixing roofs, but rather the drip drip reminds him of the guilt that he's trying to bury. We see a couple flashbacks of James standing alone, either in the desert or in the woods, because he feels alone. We see James walking through the woods, and he's searching for something, because James is searching for a lot. He's searching for redemption. He's searching for the truth of his mother. We also see 2 different references to crows in this vision set. And for me, crows have begun to represent Salish in this series. This black dress almost looks like a crow costume, like it's lined with crow feathers. At first, we see a large crow skeleton in a bird cage. And then we see a crow land on James's hand and seem to nibble on. Crows can definitely be a sign of bad things to come and even death. But crows feasting can mean that there is fortune in your future. So was this crow feasting on James's hand? I didn't really get that impression. We then see James hanging from this tree, kind of crucifixion style. And he has on the same uniform that we've seen him in the opening of episode 4, where James is floating in the water. We also see Zilpha in this set of flashbacks. And we see her in a shot that is similar to a shot we've seen Salish in many times. But Zilpha looks very different. The shot we've seen of Salish looks scary when we see it. But this shot of Zilpha is much more peaceful and almost filled with hope. She almost looks as if she's reaching for James in the water. Almost like Zilpha is James' savior. And then to James being branded with the Sankofa. It's hard to tell who's doing it or where he is when it happens, but we do see that he screams from the pain. That's not interesting in itself, but if we look inside his mouth while he's screaming, we are given a brand new reason to believe that James isn't human. James seems to have fangs in this shot, and I am pretty shocked to see this. I became fairly certain that James was a normal human being who could just use his third eye. And now they're giving us another reason to possibly believe that James is more than human. Something else that occurs in this set of visions that we have not seen before is James has a flashback to an event that happened after he returned to London. Everything we have seen before occurred before he returned to London. And now we see him have flashbacks of both the giant hitting him on the head and Dumbarton stitching him up after he was stabbed by the silver-toothed man. Both of these come after we see James standing in the woods by himself and shaking his head in kind of a strange way. This makes me question if these two incidents, the giant and the silver-toothed man stabbing James, if James was a lot closer to death than we know, if James actually died at these moments. And again, this is all brought into question as to whether or not James is a normal human and can be killed, especially because right before these things, we see he has bangs. Now on top of this, we see one more thing, which is Salish drowning him in the water again. And remember, Brace said to James, she held you under until the bubbles stopped. So, did we see 3 moments of James dying? Are these 3 times that James died and came back to life? Then we get another flashback of a more recent event, the event of when James visits Zilpha. But we see that it's not James behind the mask, it's Thorn. Don't know what this means, but Thorn does look into the camera, perhaps like he's looking at James. Could it be that James is simply haunted by the idea of Zilpha not being with him at this point? It's kind of what it feels like to me. And then 2 skulls with maggots. And this is kind of a dark image, but being that being Taboo is the show that it is, and it's a fairly dark show, I see eternal love when I see these 2 skulls with maggots. That's what it means to me, and it makes sense that it comes after Zilpha. Right after that, we see James floating in the water, as we have in the opening credits and in the beginning of episode 4, and suddenly he opens his eyes. And so again, is this another time that James died and came back to life? Everybody on the Influence died. James was the only survivor. So it's weird that he survived, and it's questionable whether he died and came back to life. The last thing we see in this vision really caught my attention. It's something that has had my attention the whole show, but I'm still not exactly certain what they're saying with it, but it's a drowning, torn American flag. That's what this vision ends on. And we see this in the opening of every episode. Is it the drowning of liberty? Is it the drowning of dreams? I'm not really sure what this drowning, torn American flag is supposed to stand for. And again, as we've seen throughout these visions in episode 7, we see that goldish orangish color in the background. I'm not exactly sure what these visions are telling us in episode 7. We can be certain that the first set of visions he had definitely center around Horus and Salish, and it definitely seemed to be focused on what James's parents think of him. And we know that we definitely saw both Horus and Salish in different ways than we ever have before. We've always seen Horus on the shore or in his makeup, and we've always seen Salish in her black dress. The parents are presented in a much more normal, ordinary fashion in these visions. In the second set of visions, Zilpha definitely sticks out. The one that sticks out the most to me is the shot of Zilpha looking down into the water like a savior for James. And this happens just a few shots before James opens his eyes in the water. Also, James hanging like he was crucified, and the flashbacks to his near-death experiences as to whether or not they were near-death experiences or death experiences. So once again, we have the question opened up, is James human? And I guess we're not going to get a final answer to this until... Don't be afraid to like the video if you did. If you have any friends that watch Taboo, go ahead and share the video with them. It'll give you something to talk about. If you want to make sure you catch all of our videos on Taboo, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell, and you will be notified every time we upload one. You have a great day.